Hello, my name is David Sepulveda, and I'll be talking today on how British culture history has affected the decision of not fully joining the European Union and the result of the current Brexit situation. So, to begin with, it is important for us to start addressing the historical background that the British and the French have had for, well, historically, for over 500 years. And especially this situation was ideologically sold by the promoters of Brexit, that they had to regain control of the immigration policy, and that the immigration policy cannot be controlled by some bureaucrat in Brussels. So it was a matter of national identity and national priority to regain control of their immigration policy, to start establishing who was able to enter the country and who wasn't. And also, it is important to take into account that the British already had an experience of disorganized migration when they had the first waves of Pakistani immigration back in the 60s. The immigration back then, it had little to no control at all. And then those populations of Muslims, for example, they were receiving the country, but they could not be integrated. They became largely independent societies within the society. So that has created a lot of cultural issues within England. Or at least that is part of the explanation for this. The other part of the explanation on the matter is that, well, you are told by the media and by certain studies that as long as you are white and you have college education, you will probably be more likely to be open to immigration than if you're white with low qualifications. So that is part of the whole story they are trying to sell. But it is important to mention that we always see partial truths, but never the entire truth, and everyone is trying to manipulate. So on one hand, we have these polarizing topics about identity and values, diversity, immigration rights, jobs, ethnic diversity, religion, as well as the changes in the British electorate. And now we see that there is a younger generation that is, as for some studies point out, more open to diversity and more open to the inclusion of ethnic minorities. And at the same time, we also see that old whites are portrayed as, rather ignorant and racist. And England does have a history of racism, so it's impossible not to keep that factor into account. But it is important to notice the division that we see in England at the moment. For example, yes, we see that England is practically part of the few countries that has had a Muslim mayor directing the fate of a city, for example. And yeah, we see that, but at the same time, we see divisions in the society, conservatism, as well as the push from the more conservative elements of society to gain larger control on policy immigration. So we have this fight between it is a polarizing topic. It cannot be resolved, not in the short term. And also, if we go back to the history of England, well, they part of their strength is in the is in the in the respect for their own traditions. So identity, as well as national pride, is very important. So you may be a Muslim or you may come from somewhere else, but in the end you have to be English. And if you're not integrating fully, you're going to create this sort of uh, divisions with the rest of the native society, with the native population. Um, However, it is also as a topic that is not frequently mentioned, that the Brexit campaign was also boosted and based upon fear. For example, on the back in the day in 2016, Turkey had the chance to become part of the European Union, and it meant that all Turkish people, in theory, would have been able to migrate into Turkey. So they were they were creating this campaign of fear, telling the British electorate that they were going to get flooded by Turkish unregulated migrants. And so fears of terrorism, fears of expanding the current problems they have, as well as the as well as not being able to control their own migrating policy. So in the end, this is not about jobs. This is more about keeping some people out of the country, and also you see the psychological warfare between different sectors of the media that are trying to sell their own version of the truth. And therefore in the end, you it all depends on what channel you're tuning in. For the European Union, we see now that the Brexit, it will come at a high price for the British, because they will, well, they will be they will have restriction of movement, as well as difficulty to export, a lot of paperwork. However, they have managed to achieve something very important as well, which is that at least they decrease the immigration levels to a historical low rate, which is what is happening right now, and that's what they wanted in the end. So what we see about what we may conclude on how British culture has affected the decision of not fully joining the European Union, and the whole Brexit chaos that we are witnessing right now, is that England will prevail, and they will cling to their own past and their own traditions to get ahead. And although this is a blow for them, and this is shaking the basis of the country at the moment, they will in the end get by and overcome the situation. Why? Because they have been doing so for the last 1500 years. So if they did it before 100 times before, they will continue to do it now. And in the end, we don't know how future be like, but the past may tell us something about the future, and about the future of England as well.